Here's the hard truth. Alabama is hurting, losing 5,000 residents from 2020 to 2024, and it's ranked the 6th worst state to live in for 2025 by U.S. News and World Report, just behind Arkansas. That's right, Arkansas. A state whose main export, as far as I can tell, is the lingering question of why. So, what's going so spectacularly wrong in the Yellowhammer state that people are packing their bags faster than you can say roll tide? I'm leaving? Could you survive in a state where opportunity feels like a long shot, and the nearest hospital is a country mile away, possibly staffed by someone who also runs the local bait shop? Let's find out. Right, let's dive into the shallow end of Alabama's economic pool, which, as it turns out, is alarmingly shallow and possibly contains things you don't want to identify. We're talking about poverty. Not the oops, I left my wallet at home. Can you spot me for this artisanal kombucha? Kind of poverty, but the deep-seated generational kind that sticks to you like Alabama humidity in August, relentless, uncomfortable, and making everything feel just a little bit harder. The official poverty rate? A staggering 16.1% as of the latest figures, which is significantly higher than the national average. And that's the number, which often feels like a polite underestimate, like saying a raccoon in your attic is just a nocturnal, uninvited housemate with questionable hygiene. This isn't just a statistic to be tut-tutted over and then forgotten. It's a daily, grinding reality for nearly 1 in 6 Alabamians, impacting everything from where they live, if they can afford to live anywhere securely, to what they can put on the table for their children. It's a cycle that's incredibly hard to break, especially when the rungs on the ladder out are either missing, actively greased with indifference, or possibly on fire. Think about that. 1 in 6 people. That means in any given group of Alabamians, at least one person is likely struggling profoundly. A fact often masked by Southern politeness and a fierce sense of pride that makes asking for help incredibly difficult. And when we talk about low income, we're not kidding. The median household income hovers around $59,609, which might sound vaguely okay until you realize the national median is closer to $75,000. That's a significant gap, a chasm really, meaning many families are constantly treading water, often working multiple low-wage jobs with unpredictable hours just to stay afloat. Never mind get ahead. This financial strain directly translates into food insecurity for a horrifying number of households, especially those with children. Imagine having to choose between paying the electricity bill to keep the lights on, or buying enough groceries so your kids don't go to bed hungry. That's not a hypothetical dilemma from a Dickens novel. It's a Tuesday for far too many Alabamians. Food banks are stretched thin, often running on shoestring budgets and volunteer goodwill. And the social safety net often feels more like a sieve, with holes big enough for entire communities to fall through, unnoticed and unassisted. It's a grim picture, like a Norman Rockwell painting that's been left out in the rain, then run over by a monster truck, and then set on fire, just for good measure. All right, so you've got widespread poverty, a constant companion for many. What often goes hand in hand with that? Like an unwelcome +1 to an already terrible party, crime. And in Alabama, it's not just petty theft we're talking about, like someone swiping your prize-winning watermelon from the county fair. No, this is the kind of crime that makes you double-check your door locks, then maybe install a few more. Then consider a moat, possibly with alligators, if local ordinances allow. The state consistently ranks among the highest in the nation for both violent and property crime rates. We're talking cities like Birmingham, Mobile, and even Montgomery frequently appearing on most dangerous cities in America lists, which is not exactly a selling point for the local tourism board. Come to Alabama, you might get robbed, but the barbecue is to die for, possibly literally, depending on the neighborhood. A significant driver of this crime, particularly the violent kind that makes headlines and instills deep-seated fear, is drug trafficking and the associated gang activity. Alabama's unfortunate geographical position makes it a convenient corridor for illicit substances moving north from the Gulf or east-west across the southern states. This isn't just a problem for law enforcement to chase down bad guys in high-speed pursuits. It fuels gang violence, turf wars, retaliatory shootings, and a host of other societal ills that ripple outwards, affecting innocent bystanders and eroding community trust. And who's supposed to deal with all this escalating chaos? Well, that brings us to another fun fact. If by fun you mean deeply concerning police shortages. Many departments across the state, from large urban forces to small rural sheriff's offices, are struggling desperately with recruitment and retention. The cumulative effect of all this high crime rates, pervasive drug issues, and understaffed police forces is that residents simply don't feel safe. This isn't just about statistics on a page. It's about a fundamental degradation of the quality of life. It's about parents genuinely worrying when their kids are out after dark, or even during the day in some places. It's about businesses struggling with repeated break-ins and vandalism, making it harder to operate and provide local jobs. It's about a general sense of unease and anxiety that hangs in the air, a corrosive element that makes it even harder to address the underlying issues like poverty, lack of opportunity, and failing schools. When you can't trust that your community is a safe place, it erodes social cohesion, breeds suspicion, and makes it nearly impossible to build the kind of collaborative efforts needed for positive change. It's a vicious cycle, and Alabama seems to be stuck on a particularly unpleasant spin cycle, with the setting on permanent pressure and anxiety. Now, if you're thinking, well, all these problems are terrible, but at least the kids are all right, getting a good education to build a better future. I have some truly invigoratingly depressing news for you about Alabama's public education system. Well, let's just say it's not exactly topping the charts unless those charts are for states most likely to make you wish you were homeschooled by a particularly enthusiastic squirrel with a GED. We're looking at consistently low graduation rates. Yes, the number of students actually making it through kindergarten through 12th grade and emerging with a high school diploma is a serious, persistent concern. And for those who do manage to navigate the system and graduate, the story doesn't always get rosier. Test scores in key subjects like math, reading, and science frequently lag significantly behind national averages, painting a rather bleak picture of an education system struggling to equip its students with even the basic foundational skills they need to succeed in college, vocational training, or the modern workforce. So why is this happening? Why are Alabama's schools so consistently near the bottom of national rankings? Well, buckle up, because it's a delightful cocktail of interconnected problems, starting with chronic systemic underfunding. Alabama has historically spent less per pupil than many other states, often significantly so. And that sustained lack of investment shows year after year, generation after generation. It means outdated textbooks, sometimes shared between multiple students. It means crumbling school facilities with leaky roofs, unreliable heating and cooling, and a dire shortage of modern technology and learning resources. And who's supposed to work miracles in this under-resourced, often challenging environment? Teachers. Except, oh wait, there's a critical teacher shortage too. Low pay, often thousands of dollars below the national average and neighboring states, combined with challenging working conditions, large class sizes, and a general lack of respect and support for the profession, have made it incredibly difficult to attract and retain qualified educators, especially in high-need areas and subjects. And of course, no discussion of systemic problems in the American South, particularly concerning education, would be complete without addressing the pervasive issue of inequality. Educational inequality in Alabama is stark, often falling along deeply entrenched racial and socioeconomic lines. Schools in wealthier, predominantly white suburban districts tend to have far more resources, newer facilities, more experienced teachers, and consequently, better student outcomes than those in poorer, often majority-minority urban and rural communities. This isn't an accident. It's a result of historical and ongoing funding disparities tied to local property taxes, as well as more subtle systemic biases. So, the promise of education as a great equalizer? In many parts of Alabama, it often feels more like a great sorter, reinforcing existing disadvantages and limiting opportunities before a child even reaches high school. It's a system that's not just failing some students, it's actively setting them up for a tougher path in life, which, given everything else we're discussing about Alabama, is truly the last thing they need. Right, so if you're poor, possibly a victim of crime, your kids are in struggling schools, and your own education was, let's say, character building in its inadequacy, you might be fervently hoping for a robust, accessible healthcare system to catch you when you inevitably fall ill from all the stress, or just from, living. Well, about that. Alabama's healthcare system is, to put it mildly, not in the best of health itself. In fact, it's often gasping for breath. Let's start with a rather grim, overarching statistic: life expectancy. Alabamians, on average, live shorter lives than people in most other states. We're talking years, not just a few months shaved off. This isn't just bad luck or a statistical blip. It's a direct reflection of the overall health of the population and the accessibility, affordability, and quality of care available, or more accurately, unavailable. And why is life expectancy so dismally low? Well, a big part of it is the alarmingly high prevalence of chronic illnesses. Alabama consistently ranks near the top, which in this case is the bottom for conditions like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and certain types of cancer. These aren't just unfortunate ailments that strike randomly. They are often exacerbated by lifestyle factors intricately linked to poverty, like lack of access to nutritious food, lack of education about health and nutrition, and crucially, severely limited access to preventative care. And speaking of access, a significant portion of the adult population under 65 lacks any form of health insurance. Alabama is one of the handful of states that has stubbornly refused to fully expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, meaning hundreds of thousands of low-income working adults fall into a cruel coverage gap. They earn too much to qualify for Alabama's incredibly restrictive traditional Medicaid, but too little to afford subsidized marketplace plans. This problem of access is particularly acute and devastating in rural areas, which make up a large and often forgotten part of Alabama. Many rural counties have seen their local hospitals close in recent years due to financial pressures, creating vast healthcare deserts where residents have to travel long, arduous distances for even basic medical care, let alone specialist treatment or emergency services. Imagine having a heart attack or a stroke, and the nearest adequately equipped emergency room is an hour's drive away, assuming you have a car and someone to drive you, on poorly maintained country roads. That's the terrifying reality for many. This lack of accessible care means that manageable conditions can escalate into life-threatening emergencies, and preventative care, the kind that saves lives and money in the long run, is often a luxury people simply can't afford in terms of time, transportation, or out-of-pocket costs. It's a system that's not just strained. In many parts of Alabama, it's practically non-existent, leaving people to fend for themselves in a healthcare lottery where the odds are decidedly and tragically not in their favor. So we've established that many Alabamians are wrestling with poverty, dodging crime, navigating a labyrinthine and often inadequate education system, and praying they don't get sick because healthcare is a gamble. You might be wondering, with a touch of desperate optimism, is the economy at least booming, offering a shining beacon of hope, a pathway out of this morass? And the answer, my friends, delivered with a sigh that could curdle milk, is a resounding meh, not really. Alabama's economy isn't exactly a high-octane engine of prosperity. It's more like an old, beloved pickup truck that sputters occasionally, makes a lot of concerning noises, but mostly just struggles to get up any significant incline. Gross domestic product growth has been sluggish, often trailing behind the national average, and embarrassingly, many of its southeastern neighbors who seem to be lapping Alabama on the economic track. Job growth, similarly, has been less than stellar, often characterized by fits and starts rather than sustained, robust expansion. It's not that there are no jobs being created, but the quality, pay, and long-term security of many of those jobs are persistent, nagging concerns. A major reason for this economic lethargy is the state's heavy, and some would say over-reliance on traditional, often low-wage industries. While manufacturing, especially automotive, which has seen some investment, agriculture, and forestry are undeniably important sectors and part of Alabama's heritage, many of the jobs they provide don't pay enough to comfortably support a family, offer limited benefits, and often lack pathways for significant upward mobility. There's been a concerted push by state leaders to attract higher-tech, higher-wage industries, and there have been some notable successes, often trumpeted loudly. However, the overall economic landscape is still heavily skewed towards sectors that are vulnerable to automation or global competition, and which don't typically require or reward high levels of education. Compounding this is the issue of low educational attainment in the workforce, which we've lamented earlier but bears repeating in this economic context. A workforce with lower average levels of education and specialized skills is inherently less attractive to the kind of high-paying, knowledge-based industries that drive modern economic growth. It's a classic, frustrating chicken and egg problem. Businesses want skilled workers before they'll invest, but it's hard to develop a highly skilled workforce without good jobs, good schools, and accessible training programs to aspire to and participate in. Alabama seems to be caught in this exasperating loop, like a GIF of economic stagnation, forever buffering. And what's the inevitable consequence of a stalled economy with limited high-paying opportunities and a less than dynamic job market? You guessed it, people leave, especially those with options. But we'll get to that particular tragedy in more detail later. For now, understand that the economic climate is a significant push factor, contributing to that population decline we mentioned at the very start. It's hard to build a thriving future when your most promising talent sees more promise and better paychecks somewhere, anywhere else. All right, let's talk about the very foundations of a functioning modern society infrastructure. We're talking about the roads you drive on or try to avoid, the bridges you cross and pray over, the water you drink and hope is clean, and the internet that connects you to human knowledge and cat videos. In Alabama, much of this critical infrastructure isn't just aging gracefully, it's practically groaning under the strain, like a grandparent forced to do the Macarena at a wedding. It's trying, but it's clearly uncomfortable and bits might fall off. Let's start with the most visible part: roads and bridges. Alabama has a significant and frankly alarming number of them rated in poor or mediocre condition. This isn't just an inconvenience causing teeth-rattling commutes, it's an economic drag and a genuine safety hazard. And if you're thinking, well, I'll just take public transit to avoid those crumbling roads, I admire your optimism, but that's simply not a viable option in most of Alabama. Public transportation systems are severely limited, often non-existent, especially outside of Birmingham or Mobile. For many rural Alabamians, not owning a car means being effectively stranded, cut off from jobs, healthcare, grocery stores, and basic services. This disproportionately affects the poor, the elderly, and people with disabilities, further entrenching their isolation and economic hardship. It's a system designed around the assumption that everyone has a car, which, given the poverty rates, is a rather bold and inaccurate assumption. Then there are the water and power systems. Aging pipes lead to frequent water main breaks, service disruptions, and persistent concerns about water quality and contamination. The power grid is vulnerable during extreme weather events, leading to prolonged outages that can be life-threatening. But perhaps the most glaring infrastructure deficit is the lack of reliable, affordable, high-speed internet access. Large swaths of rural Alabama are digital deserts, where broadband is either unavailable or prohibitively expensive. In an era where internet access is as essential as electricity for education, job searching, telehealth, and government services, this is a massive, self-inflicted handicap. It isolates communities, hurts local businesses, and denies children the tools they need to succeed. It's like trying to compete in a Formula One race while riding a donkey. A charming donkey with a floral wreath, but a donkey nonetheless. And it's getting lapped. So, on top of everything else we've painstakingly detailed, the entrenched poverty, the unsettling crime rates, the struggling schools, the patchy healthcare, the sputtering economy, and the crumbling infrastructure, Alabama also has the distinct unwelcome pleasure of being a magnet for natural disasters. It's like Mother Nature has Alabama on her smite frequently and with vigor list, and she checks it often. We're talking about a state that lies squarely in Dixie Alley, a region notorious for violent long-track tornadoes, especially in the spring and fall. These aren't just little picturesque twisters like in The Wizard of Oz. These are devastating EF4 and F5 monsters that can wipe out entire communities in minutes, leaving a trail of unimaginable destruction, injury, and heartbreaking loss of life. The psychological toll on residents who live under the constant looming threat of these events is immense. But tornadoes, as terrifying as they are just one flavor of meteorological misery on Alabama's extensive menu of natural hazards. The state also deals with significant and increasingly frequent flooding, particularly in its southern regions, along its many rivers and coastal plains. Heavy rainfall events, which climate scientists tell us are becoming more intense and common due to a warming atmosphere, can inundate homes, businesses, and vast tracts of agricultural land, causing millions in damages and displacing families for weeks or months. And let's not forget the coastal threat hurricanes. While Alabama doesn't have as much exposed coastline as Florida or Louisiana, its Gulf Coast, including popular areas like Gulf Shores and Mobile Bay, is regularly battered by tropical storms and major hurricanes, bringing destructive winds, life-threatening storm surge, and torrential rain that can extend far inland, causing widespread power outages and further flooding. The cumulative impact of these recurring natural disasters on homes, farms, businesses, and livelihoods is profound and multifaceted. Agricultural communities can see entire harvests wiped out in a single storm. Small businesses, already operating on thin margins, can be destroyed, never to reopen, taking local jobs with them. Families can lose everything they own, sometimes repeatedly. And while Alabamians are justly known for their resilience, their strong community spirit, and their willingness to help neighbors in the face of adversity, and they truly are remarkable in that regard, there's a limit to how much any community, any state, can endure year after year without significant, sustained external support. The constant cycle of destruction and rebuilding takes a massive economic and emotional toll, further straining already limited state and local resources and making it that much harder for the state and its people to get ahead. It's like trying to build a magnificent sandcastle during high tide, with a particularly vindictive seagull constantly dive-bombing your most intricate turrets, while also stealing your lunch. Now, we touched on drug trafficking earlier as a significant contributor to Alabama's alarmingly high crime rates. But it's worth a deeper, more depressing dive because the state is grappling with a full-blown drug crisis that's tearing through communities like a nightmare. Specifically, Alabama has been hit incredibly hard by the twin epidemics of methamphetamine and opioids. Meth, with its relatively easy local production in clandestine labs and its devastatingly addictive properties, has been a scourge for years, particularly in economically depressed rural areas where opportunities are scarce and despair can take root easily. It hollows out individuals, families, and entire communities with its corrosive effects. And then came the opioids, a multi-act tragedy. First, it was the overprescription of powerful painkiller medications, creating a generation of people unknowingly dependent. When the crackdown on pill mills and prescribing practices began, many of those dependent individuals turned to cheaper and more readily available heroin. And now, increasingly, the market is being flooded with illicitly manufactured fentanyl and its even more potent analogs, which are terrifyingly powerful, often mixed into other drugs without the user's knowledge, and responsible for a horrifying surge in overdose deaths. This isn't just a big city problem, though it's certainly there. It's everywhere, from the suburbs to the smallest, most tight-knit towns, leaving a trail of addiction, overdose deaths, shattered families, and orphaned children. The connection between this pervasive drug crisis and crime is undeniable, direct, and deeply troubling for public safety. A significant portion of property crime, burglaries, thefts from vehicles, shoplifting, is driven by individuals desperately trying to fund their addiction. The need for the next fix can override all other considerations, and the drug trade itself is inherently violent, leading to assaults, armed robberies, homicides, and a general climate of fear and intimidation in affected neighborhoods. This puts an enormous, almost unbearable strain on law enforcement agencies, who are often the first responders to overdose calls, increasingly armed with naloxone, and the ones dealing with the fallout of drug-related violence. And remember those police shortages we talked about? Yeah, they're not exactly helping here. Officers are overwhelmed, dealing with complex societal problems that go far beyond traditional policing, often without adequate resources, training for addiction and mental health issues, or community support services. It's like asking a plumber to perform brain surgery. They're both skilled professionals, but it's fundamentally the wrong tool and training for an incredibly complex job. The overall impact on public safety and community well-being is catastrophic. Okay, after that relentless barrage of doom and gloom, you might be desperately clinging to a sliver of hope thinking, well, surely housing must be dirt cheap in Alabama, right? Maybe I can just buy a nice, affordable little house, put up a very tall fence, and ignore everything else. And you'd be partially correct in that misleading way statistics can sometimes be. On paper, Alabama boasts some of the most affordable median home prices in the entire country. Sounds great, doesn't it? A veritable real estate paradise, a haven for first-time homebuyers? Except, and there's always an except with Alabama, isn't there? Lurking like a water moccasin in a seemingly tranquil pond? The homeownership rate, while decent, isn't as universally high as you might expect given those tantalizingly low prices. And for those who rent, either by choice or necessity, the situation can be surprisingly tough, with rising rents in many areas, particularly in and around the cities where job opportunities, however limited or low-paying, might exist. It's like finding a $5 bill on the street, only to realize it's covered in something sticky, possibly biohazardous, and definitely not worth the trouble. So why the disconnect between affordable list prices and the often challenging reality on the ground? Well, part of it is that affordable can often be a euphemism for you get what you pay for and sometimes less. While you can certainly find lovely, well-maintained homes in many parts of Alabama, there's also a significant stock of older, often dilapidated housing, particularly in economically distressed urban neighborhoods and forgotten rural communities. We're talking about properties with frequent, unaddressed code violations, leaky roofs that foster mold, faulty wiring that's a fire hazard, plumbing that's more of a suggestion than a functional system. For low-income families, these might be the only housing options available, trapping them in substandard, unhealthy living conditions that can exacerbate health problems, especially for children. And remember those delightful natural disasters we discussed with such enthusiasm? Many of these affordable homes are located in low-lying, flood-prone areas, or are older structures not built to withstand high winds, making them incredibly vulnerable. So, your cheap house might come with a complimentary, unsolicited indoor swimming pool in the living room every time it rains heavily, or a sudden, unplanned skylight during tornado season. And then there's the ever-present, ever-escalating specter of rising insurance costs, which we've already touched upon in the context of natural disasters. But it bears repeating because it directly impacts housing affordability and security. Even if you can scrape together the down payment and afford the mortgage on a seemingly cheap house, can you afford the increasingly astronomical insurance premiums? Especially if you're in a designated high-risk zone for tornadoes, hurricanes, or floods. For many Alabamians, the answer is a resounding and often heartbreaking no. Now you might be thinking, with a commendable but perhaps misplaced faith in democratic processes, with all these serious, multifaceted problems plaguing the state, surely the politicians in Alabama, the elected leaders, the policymakers, are working tirelessly day and night in a spirit of bipartisan cooperation and selfless public service to find solutions and fix things. And to that, I would say, with a gentle pat on your idealistic head, oh, you sweet, naive summer child, bless your optimistic heart. Alabama's political landscape is, well, it's a landscape. It has features. Some of those features include a long, rich, and impressively storied history of political corruption that would make a soap opera writer blush with envy at its sheer audacity and frequency. We're talking scandals involving governors, speakers of the House, sheriffs, judges, you name a public office. And there's a decent chance someone, at some point, has disgraced it spectacularly. This isn't just about a few bad apples. It's about a political culture that, at times, seems to view public service more as a public serving themselves opportunity, or a chance to enrich cronies and lobbyists. This recurring pattern of corruption, whether it's bribery, embezzlement, or abuse of power, erodes public trust to dangerously low levels and makes it incredibly difficult to enact meaningful reforms, because who do you trust to carry them out without skimming off the top or diverting resources to their pet projects? It's like asking a committee of foxes to redesign the henhouse for better security, and then being surprised when the new design includes a very convenient fox-sized entrance. Beyond the occasional headline-grabbing scandal that provides fodder for late-night comedians, hello, there's the more mundane but equally damaging issue of persistent budget challenges and policy decisions that often seem to exacerbate the state's problems rather than solve them. Alabama's tax system, for instance, is notoriously regressive, relying heavily on sales taxes on everyday necessities, including groceries in many places, that disproportionately affect low-income individuals and families, while property taxes are among the lowest in the nation, particularly for large agricultural and timber holdings. This starves local governments and, crucially, public schools of much-needed revenue, perpetuating cycles of underfunding and inequality. Then there are deliberate policy choices like the aforementioned refusal to fully expand Medicaid, which leaves hundreds of thousands uninsured and hospitals struggling, or the enactment of some of the weakest gun laws in the country, despite Alabama having one of the highest rates of gun violence. These aren't accidental outcomes. They are the result of political choices, priorities, and ideologies that leave many Alabamians feeling frustrated, unheard, and deeply cynical about their government's ability or willingness to address their most pressing needs. It's a political climate that often feels more interested in fighting symbolic culture wars than in fighting actual poverty, improving healthcare, or adequately funding education. If there's one pervasive, insidious thread that runs through nearly every single issue we've painstakingly dissected in Alabama, from the crushing weight of poverty to the failings of the healthcare system, from the inequities in education to the dysfunction in its politics, it's the deep, historically entrenched, and stubbornly persistent problem of social inequality. This isn't some abstract academic concept debated in ivory towers. It's a lived daily reality that shapes the opportunities, the experiences, and ultimately the outcomes for different groups of Alabamians in profoundly and often cruelly unequal ways. Let's start with the most glaring and historically charged racial disparities. Despite the heroic struggles and monumental progress of the civil rights movement, which had so many of its pivotal, blood-soaked moments on Alabama soil, the state continues to grapple with significant, undeniable gaps between its Black and white residents across virtually every single indicator of well-being. We're talking about demonstrably higher rates of poverty, lower median incomes, wider wealth gaps, and starker health disparities for African Americans in Alabama. Black Alabamians face higher rates of infant mortality, lower life expectancy, and less access to quality health care. In the education system, schools in predominantly Black communities are often under-resourced compared to those in wealthier, whiter areas, leading to disparities in academic achievement and graduation rates. The criminal justice system, too, exhibits profound racial biases, from policing practices to sentencing outcomes. It's as if the playing field isn't just uneven, it's tilted at a 45-degree angle, and some people are forced to play uphill in flip-flops against a headwind, while carrying the weight of generations of systemic discrimination. These disparities extend beyond race and ethnicity, though they often intersect in compounding ways. Gender inequality also remains a significant challenge in Alabama. Women, particularly women of color, face persistent pay gaps, earning significantly less than their male counterparts for similar work and with similar qualifications. They are also starkly underrepresented in positions of leadership, whether that's in the state legislature, in corporate boardrooms, or in other influential roles. Access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including contraception and abortion services, is severely restricted, further impacting women's economic autonomy, educational attainment, and overall health and well-being. It's a system that, while perhaps not always explicitly designed to hold women back in every instance in the modern era, certainly has that practical effect in many critical areas of life. It's like a race where some runners are required to carry extra weights, or run with their shoelaces tied together, just because. And then there's the issue of voting access, which, in a state with Alabama's history of voter suppression, is always a sensitive and critically important point. While overt poll taxes and literacy tests are thankfully things of the past, concerns remain and are often litigated about modern-day barriers that can disproportionately affect minority voters, low-income individuals, the elderly, and students. These can include strict photo voter ID laws where the qualifying IDs are not easily obtainable for everyone, reductions in polling places or hours in certain communities, and complex, sometimes confusing, voter registration processes, not to mention felon disenfranchisement laws that have a massively lopsided racial impact, barring hundreds of thousands disproportionately black men from voting even after they have served their time. These inequalities aren't just unfortunate side effects of other problems. They are systemic, deeply woven into the fabric of the state's institutions, its economy, and its social structures. Addressing them requires more than just good intentions or symbolic gestures. It requires a fundamental re-examination and restructuring of policies, power dynamics, and resource allocation. Until then, Alabama will continue to be a place where your starting line in life, and indeed your entire racetrack, is heavily and unfairly influenced by your race, your gender, your zip code, or the family you were born into. And so, we arrive at our final and perhaps most existentially troubling reason. Alabama finds itself consistently ranked among the worst states to live in the dreaded, debilitating brain drain. We've hinted at it, we've danced around it like it's a sensitive family secret, but now it's time to stare it right in its dispiriting, future-robbing face. What exactly is brain drain? It's what happens when a state's brightest, most educated, most talented, and most ambitious young people look around at the landscape of opportunities available, or more accurately, the stark lack thereof, and make the rational, if heartbreaking decision that their future, their careers, and their aspirations are better pursued elsewhere. They graduate from Alabama's universities, often with excellent educations from well-regarded programs, and then they pack their hard-earned diplomas, their hopes, and their U-Hauls, and head for states with more dynamic job markets, higher salaries, better quality of life amenities, and frankly, more appealing social, cultural, and political environments. It's not that they don't love Alabama. Many have deep roots, family ties, and a genuine affection for their home state. It's that Alabama, in its current condition, often doesn't love them back with enough tangible prospects, enough reasons to stay, enough opportunities to build the kind of life they envision for themselves and their future families. The consequences of this continuous exodus of young talent are far-reaching, insidious, and deeply damaging to the state's long-term economic and social health. As younger, educated, and often more progressive individuals leave, the state's population becomes, on average, older, less educated, and sometimes more resistant to change. An aging population puts more strain on already burdened healthcare services and social security systems, while contributing less to the tax base and the dynamism of the workforce. Furthermore, the persistent low educational attainment of the remaining workforce, which we've lamented repeatedly, makes it even harder for Alabama to attract and retain the innovative, high-wage industries that could diversify its economy and create better opportunities. It's a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Lack of opportunity drives talent away, and the loss of that talent further diminishes the state's capacity to create new opportunities. Alabama is essentially exporting its most valuable future resource, its human capital, its potential innovators, entrepreneurs, community leaders, and skilled professionals. It's like a farmer carefully cultivating his best seeds, nurturing them with care, only to watch them get blown away by the prevailing winds to fertilize his neighbor's more prosperous field. This brain drain saps the state of its vitality, its creativity, its intellectual energy, and its potential for growth and positive change. Who will start the new businesses that create good jobs? Who will lead the community initiatives that address local problems? Who will demand and drive the political and social reforms that are so desperately needed if a significant portion of those most equipped and motivated to do so are building their lives and careers in Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, or further afield? It paints a bleak picture for Alabama's long-term prospects, making it exponentially harder to overcome all the other deeply entrenched challenges we've detailed. Reversing this trend requires a monumental, concerted, and sustained effort to create an Alabama where young people not only want to stay, but can genuinely thrive, feel valued, and see a future. Without that, the state risks becoming a place that's constantly looking backward, celebrating its past, sometimes selectively, because its future keeps moving out of state. It's a slow-motion crisis that undermines any hope of truly turning things around, condemning Alabama to a cycle of mediocrity and missed potential. Alabama is vibrant, proud, warm. It's a place of undeniable, breathtaking natural beauty, from its sugar-white Gulf shores to its rolling Appalachian foothills, with a complex and potent cultural heritage that has profoundly shaped America, for better and for worse. The people, when you get past the headlines and the stereotypes, possess a resilience, a deep-seated kindness, and a fierce community spirit that can make you fall in love with the state, despite its many, many, well-documented flaws. You can find genuine community here, a sense of belonging that's increasingly rare in our hyper-individualized, disconnected world. It's a place that be amazing, a place that be amazing, a place that aches with unfulfilled potential. But it's also broken, harsh, and unforgiving, particularly for those who don't fit a certain mold or who start life with disadvantages. The heavy weight of its complicated history, combined with present-day policy failures, political inertia, and deeply entrenched systemic issues, creates an environment where thriving often takes a level of grit, luck, inherited privilege, or sheer bloody-mindedness that most people simply can't summon or don't possess. It's not that people don't want to live here. Many love Alabama fiercely, stubbornly, with a passion that defies easy explanation. It's that the state itself, through 1,000 different cuts, 1,000,000 missed opportunities, makes it incredibly, unnecessarily difficult to build a secure, healthy, and prosperous life, especially if you're already starting from a position of economic or social disadvantage. So, what about you? Having heard all this, having peered into the abyss just a little, could you make it in the heart of Dixie? Could you navigate the challenges, find your niche, and perhaps even contribute to making it a better place? Or would the cumulative weight of it all prove too much? Let us know in the comments. We genuinely want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your survival strategies. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, or at least found it bracingly, uncomfortably informative, please hit that like button, subscribe for more explorations of places that are rich in spirit, but nearly impossible, or at least incredibly challenging, to call home. Until next time, try not to despair much, and maybe send some good thoughts and better policies Alabama's way.